I would call Zandvoort a friendly circuit.
The soul of Zandvoort was unique.
It's a track very interesting because you have different corners, different big bend, a long straight line.
We loved the circuit because it went up and down.
This place, this racing track, it's a unique place. For this strip of tarmac, it just twists and turns right through the golden age of motor racing. The greatest racing drivers raced here, from Juan Manuel Fangio to Ayrton Senna, and from Ascari to Jim Clark. I was born and raised here in Zandvoort, and all but grew up on this racing track. I did my first race here in 1973. I was 16 years old, without a driving license, and I went on to score my first major victory here in Formula 3. Winning in Formula 3 propelled me to Formula 1. So in 1979, I came here to Zandvoort to race my first Dutch Grand Prix. Zandvoort by then was a true classic already, very much like Monaco, Monza, Silverstone, for it had been part of Formula 1 since the very beginning of the World Championship. Sadly, inevitably, it wasn't to last. It simply couldn't last. For in the 80s, Formula 1 moved into its fantastic future, and Zandvoort became part of its glorious past. This, then, is the story of the Dutch Grand Prix. Zandvoort, August 1978. The Formula 1 circus comes to town again. 30 years ago, Grand Prix cars raced here for the first time, and the circuit has become a classic venue on the World Championship calendar. And so, as every year, racing's most famous names return to Zandvoort for the now traditional Dutch Grand Prix. Reigning champion Niki Lauda, the revolutionary turbocharged Renault, Colin Chapman's ever-innovative Team Lotus, ex-world champion James Hunt in the McLaren, the quiet yet spectacular Ronnie Patterson, and championship leader Mario Andretti. Grand Prix racing has changed dramatically since the first race at Zandvoort held in 1948. The World Championship is big business now, the arrival of sponsors having turned the sport into a multi-million-dollar industry. But those millions will soon turn out to be a mere foundation, because global television coverage is about to make Formula 1 generate unprecedented amounts of money. Zandvoort, however, has reached its height. Outdated and out of money, the circuit will soon be unable to keep up with the phenomenal rise and rise of Formula 1. Consequently, this 1978 Dutch Grand Prix will mark the beginning of the end of a legendary racing tale. 30 years after it all began in a little seaside resort nestled behind the dunes. For long, the town of Zandvoort had been a small, sleepy fishing village at the North Sea coast, just 20 miles from Amsterdam. When throughout the 19th century its vast beaches became a popular tourist attraction.
Dames en heren, dan zou ik dit casino voor geopend willen verklaren. En daarbij tevens de wens uitspreken dat het meneer Tuschinski goed mogen gaan in zijn concern.
In the 1930s, its then mayor Henry van Alphen, a sophisticated and ambitious man, wanted to give Zandvoort the international allure of the famous resorts on the French Riviera, where he had seen how a casino helped attract visitors all year round, and that organizing a motor race could greatly enhance a town's fame and image. Previous plans to build a racing circuit in Holland had all failed, but Van Alphen wasn't going to build a circuit. He was going to let cars race through the latest residential area of his ever-expanding village. A 1.4-mile track was laid out on the streets of this newest part of town. A pit area as well as grandstands was still being built when Van Alphen invited a handful of drivers to try the circuit. And they explored its limits rather enthusiastically during a test race held on May 16, 1939. 3 weeks later, all of the small Dutch motor racing fraternity came to Zandvoort for what was Holland's first ever proper motor race. The event drew a large crowd and was a huge success, as some 60 cars participated in a variety of races, while German car manufacturers Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union sent racing cars for Manfred von Bauchitsch and Hans Stuck to demonstrate. There would never be a second street race in Zandvoort though. For a year later, the Germans were back, this time to demonstrate an altogether different kind of power. In May 1940, Holland was invaded by the Third Reich's army. But World War II did not stop Mayor Van Alphen. As early as 1941, the mayor started developing a plan to build a permanent circuit just north of Zandvoort. Meanwhile, the Germans destroyed much of the town, demolishing 40 hotels and 600 houses to make way for their infamous Atlantic Wall. Van Alphen's ambitions, though, were indestructible, and he came up with a cunning plan. He persuaded the Germans to allow him to use the debris scattered around the demolished village for building the winners of the war a road to parade on. Of course, he held back who he felt would win, never mind that all he wanted to see parading on his road were racing cars. As soon as the war ended, a team of Dutch motor racing enthusiasts advised Van Alphen on how to complete the shape of his track, which would run through the dunes. In the summer of 1946, British racing legend Sammy Davis came to Zandvoort to inspect the 2.6-mile course and share his recommendations. It would take another 2 years, however, for the debris to be paved with tarmac, as in these post-war years, the authorities were able nor keen to provide Zandvoort with money for something so irrelevant as a racing circuit. Van Alphen retired in February 1948, but his successor, Mayor van Venema, kept the dream alive, and the track was finally completed that summer. The British Racing Drivers Club was quick to organize a race at Zandvoort, arranging 20 pre-war Grand Prix cars to come to Holland, such as Altas, ERAs, Maseratis and Bugattis. The race, comprising 2 25-lap heats and a 40-lap final, was won by the Siamese Prince Bira, after a spectacular scrap with Tony Rolt, whose Alfa Aitken finished just a tenth of a second behind Bira's Maserati. Back in the UK, word quickly spread about this new and exciting circuit on the other side of the North Sea. A young Sterling Moss couldn't wait to race on it.
I came to Zandvoort as soon as I could. Well, you've got to realise that after the war, of course, we didn't have racing over here. It was hill climbs and sprints and stuff. And then suddenly in Holland, you've got this fantastic circuit. And I remember going over there and being very impressed, because it was a very nice place and everybody was friendly, and the circuit was quite demanding. There were, quite a few corners that were, not that easy.
The following year, British teams and privately entered Maseratis were joined by Ferrari and Talbot Lago. Again, there were 2 heats, one by Luigi Villaresi's Ferrari and the Maserati of Reg Parnell. But at the start of the final, Giuseppe Farina's Maserati shot into the lead, followed by Villaresi and his teammate Alberto Ascari and the rest of the pack. Ferrari raced in the Netherlands for the first time, and the cars impressed mightily, outclassing the Maseratis of Farina, Bira and de Graffenried, as well as the Talbot Lago of Étincelin. The fight between the Ferraris ended 5 laps from the end, when Ascari's car lost a wheel, which handed victory to Villaresi, who raced on alone to take the flag first. Within a year after opening its gates, Zandvoort had now established itself as one of Europe's premier permanent circuits.
I would call Zandvoort a friendly circuit, not too difficult, but demanding in a couple of places so you can make up time. I think it is a fairly good driver's circuit. I think if you have the ability, you can show it, demonstrate it there much more than many other ones. And I think therefore it's quite a good circuit for the sport. I would say that the 50s were probably the really fun times.
For 1950, the International Automobile Federation organized the very first World Championship for Formula One cars. This comprised just 7 races. Zandvoort wasn't included, although its main race was now run over a full Grand Prix distance and was called the Dutch Grand Prix for the first time. In spite of the introduction of a World Championship, Formula One was still a fairly laid-back affair.
That sort of life for a young man, you know, as I was absolutely unbeatable. I mean, when I think of other poor chaps, just nothing compares with the lifestyle, you know, that we had. We didn't get paid much. I mean, I know when we go for a meal, we'd only order 1 course and then buy fruit on the road because, you know, we didn't get that much money. I mean, John Heath used to give us 25% of the start money, and then that went up as you know, as years went by. But it wasn't the sport it is now in regard to money.
Juan Manuel Fangio and Froilan Gonzalez took the lead in their Maseratis. But the ever-spectacular Raymond Sommer soon passed them both in one daring move going up the Hunsrug. Before the Frenchman pitted his Talbot for tyres, which he frantically helped change himself. He couldn't help the clutch to fail though, and he was out. Gonzalez too was in trouble, for during his second pit stop, fuel was spilled onto the hot exhaust pipe and in a trice the car was alight. The fire was put out and the blackened car readied for Froilan to rejoin the race, which was now led by Louis Roger in the other Talbot, which had stopped just once. The Ferraris of Villoresi and Ascari tried to hunt the Frenchman down, but Roger stayed ahead to score a faultless victory. The next year, only 12 cars took the start of the Dutch Grand Prix. Caught up in their fight for the 1951 world title, Ferrari and Alfa Romeo skipped the race at Zandvoort, as it still did not count towards the championship. However, Alfa driver Giuseppe Farina did come to Holland to race his own Maserati, which the reigning world champion duly put on pole position. But on Sunday, he was hampered by engine trouble. This left the now privately entered Talbots of Philippe Étincelin and Louis Roger in the lead. Although Sterling Moss got up to second place in John Heath's HWM until he pitted in the closing stages, shouting for a spark plug to be changed. Moss was sent out minus his car's bonnet and still finished third behind Étincelin and Roger, the now 2-time Dutch Grand Prix winner. After yet another exciting race, Zandvoort was becoming ever more popular with teams, drivers and spectators alike.
I think the great thing about Zandvoort was a very close-knit sort of thing. I mean, the fans were really very, very keen, as they are many places, but, you know, they really did come in and that makes a big difference. If you're playing to a public, I think it's the same in the theatre. If you're playing to people who really appreciate what you're doing, it is a much more rewarding thing. And I think Zandvoort was a track that brought people who were like that.
When Alfa Romeo and Talbot Lago withdrew from Grand Prix racing at the end of 1951, Ferrari was the only team left with a competitive Formula One car. To ensure Grand Prix races would continue to attract enough entrants, the International Automobile Federation decided that in 1952 the World Championship was to run for smaller-engined, less expensive Formula 2 cars, of which there were many. Apart from these new cars, the World Championship was also to feature a new circuit. In 1952, the Dutch Grand Prix counted towards the World Championship for the first time. So in August that year, the Ferraris of Ascari and Farina, they lined up right here on the front row of the grid. 19 drivers came to Holland for what was the 7th and penultimate round of the championship. Amongst the entrants were for the first time 2 Dutchmen, Jan Flinterman, seen here pushing his Maserati, and Dries van der Lof in an HWM. Some 40,000 spectators saw Alberto Ascari dominate. The Italian won from pole position in his Ferrari 500 F2, beating his teammates Farina and Villoresi in the 90-lap race that lasted a little less than 3 hours, despite a brief rain shower. Ascari's victory sealed his and Ferrari's first ever world title. The smooth running of this inaugural Dutch World Championship round only raised Zandvoort's profile as being one of Europe's best circuits at the time.
Zandvoort, from my point of view, was a race I'd look forward to going to because of where it was, the place and the people. The circuit itself was a very nice one. It was, you know, something that you could relax and go out and enjoy it. It wasn't something really hard. But there are times, obviously, as a racing driver, when you want circuits that are more difficult or more dangerous. I think Zandvoort is probably one of the most safest circuits, actually, and it was one we always look forward to because of A, where it was, and B, because of the atmosphere and the people and the food, and hopefully the girls.
In 1953, the Dutch Grand Prix was the third round of the championship, which was still run to Formula 2 regulations. Ferrari again dominated the season with its 500 F2, although Maserati was now becoming ever more competitive. While a variety of British cars and the French Gordinis continued to make up the numbers. Enzo Ferrari sent no less than 4 cars to Zandvoort, where drivers complained about the track's new tarmac, which should have improved the circuit, but quickly crumbled and did in fact make it trickier and slower. In practice, Juan Manuel Fangio's Maserati split the Ferraris of Farina and Ascari, who again took pole position and went on to dominate the race. After Ascari won at Zandvoort, he and Ferrari went on to claim the 1953 world title before the introduction of the new 2.5-litre Formula 1 ended the reign of the 500 F2. Financial issues meant there was no Dutch Grand Prix in 1954. But Zandvoort was reinstalled on the World Championship calendar the following year. That race was threatened to be cancelled too, though, at the last minute, and for a far more dramatic reason that casted doubts over the very future of motor racing. On June 11, a week before the Dutch Grand Prix, a Mercedes crashed into the grandstands during the Le Mans 24 Hours, killing its driver and over 80 spectators. This tragedy of unprecedented proportion sparked talks of banning motor racing altogether. But mere days later, amid this worldwide outcry, the Formula 1 circus, Mercedes included, regrouped at Zandvoort.
I think the worst thing about it was the amount of people being killed, obviously, but then Switzerland stopped racing and said, we're not going to do it, and we were worried that maybe other countries would do the same thing. And I think all the drivers were concerned about the effects that accident would have. And therefore we obviously stuck together and tried to get people to enjoy the sport that we loved.
And the people came, almost 60,000 of them. They saw a sport now dominated by the might of Mercedes that lifted Formula 1 to an all-new level of professionalism.
I'd driven, of course, Italian cars, and you know the Italians are pretty excitable, and if you have a wheel change, you hope they put the right wheel on and all that stuff. Whereas Mercedes, you know, I mean, I remember when I was being tested, I went for a test, and out, I can't remember where, it was somewhere, just after Christmas. And after I'd come in, I had black eyes because of the inboard brakes, and I got a rag out to do it. And then so up comes a German, and he bends forward, clicks his heels, and there in his hand is a bowl of water, but not an ordinary bowl of water. This was a hot bowl of water in the middle of nowhere, and in his hand was a piece of soap. And I thought, well, boy, that's how it should be.
The silver Mercedes W196s monopolized the front row, having recorded lap times of more than 10 seconds faster than Ascari's 2 years earlier. In the race, none of the new Ferrari 555s and Maserati 250Fs could live with the blistering pace of Mercedes team leader Juan Manuel Fangio and his teammate Stirling Moss, who turned the race into a two-man show.
In those days, there was quite a lot of sand around, and that was a problem not actually to the car that I was driving, but I know Neubauer didn't like me to drive, because I followed Fangio very, very close, and Neubauer didn't like that. He says all the sand comes up and goes in the engine and ruins the engine. Fangio was the best driver in the world, and I'd follow him very closely. Neubauer said to me, he said, what happens if Fangio goes off? I said, he doesn't. You know, I mean, it's as simple as that. I just learned a tremendous amount by following Fangio really closely. He was a perfect driver, absolute gentleman, I couldn't speak to him because unfortunately I only spoke a bit of French and a little bit of Italian. Of course, he's Spanish speaking, so I couldn't really talk to him about anything other than the cars and crumpet, I suppose, really, which you can do with your hands.
Amid the controversy caused by the Le Mans tragedy, a clean race without major incidents was just what motor racing needed. Zandvoort had proved to be the perfect place for just that, as far as the drivers were concerned.
I would say Zandvoort was one of the safest circuits, actually. The runoffs you got, sand will stop you quite quick, and it wasn't a particularly dangerous layout either.
Not that safety, or rather the total lack of it, was a major talking point in the 50s. It was, in fact, part of the attraction.
To me, part of the pleasure of racing was doing something that, you know, was dangerous. I think going out and driving fast and realising that if you make a mistake, you're going to have a hell of a shunt, heightens your interest. We used to lose a driver, you know, 2 or 3 a year, which was a terrible thing. But having said that, you know, when somebody died, you'd have to say to yourself, well, if it had been me, I'd have been somewhere different. I wouldn't have taken the corner this way or that, and to keep your confidence up. There's nobody holding your foot down. You've got to do it. And if you don't do it, then you're not successful.
It was lack of money, not safety, that kept Zandvoort off the World Championship calendar for 2 years, before the Dutch Grand Prix was held again in 1958. Mercedes was long gone, and Ferrari was now being challenged by cars built by British constructors, such as BRM, Van Wall, Lotus and Cooper. The Coopers were the first rear-engined Grand Prix cars since the Auto Unions of the 1930s, and were about to revolutionize the sport. Speeds had gone up yet again. Cars now blasting through the Zandvoort forest on the back of the circuit at over 150 miles per hour. The Van Walls claimed the front row with practice times 3 seconds a lap faster than Fangio had been with the Mercedes in 1955. Over 50,000 spectators saw the Van Walls head a field of 17 cars at the start of the 75-lap race. 2 of the 3 Van Walls broke down, but that of Stirling Moss led from start to finish, lapping the Formula 2 spec Porsche of local hero Caro Godin de Beaufort several times along the way. The BRMs of Shell and Bera completed the top 3, but never threatened Moss, who won the race in a little more than 2 hours.
The Van Wall was never a nice car to drive. I mean, you can't criticise it because it won the World Championship, which is terrific. But you couldn't really set it up and enjoy driving. But it won.
Very well. Hey! Congratulations. Congratulations. Was it a good race? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Excuse me. Jolly good.
As the first decade of the World Championship came to an end, Zandvoort's place on the Grand Prix calendar seemed secured. In 1959, Van Wall had withdrawn, but other British constructors took control of Formula 1. Not the revolutionary rear-engined Coopers would win in Holland, however, but for the first time the so often ridiculed BRM team. The BRM had been improved during tests in Holland in the week leading up to the race. It was the BRM of Joachim Bonnier that claimed pole position and took the lead, as Moss was forced to fight his way back through the field after making a poor start. Stirling soon caught up with Bonnier and would ultimately pass the Swede and take control of the race, while the Ferraris, the reigning world champions, trailed the front runners. The all-new Aston Martins also failed to make an impression. One of these cars broke down after just a few laps, while the engine of Carroll Shelby's Aston failed on lap 26. Moss did not finish either, for his Cooper's gearbox packed up in the closing stages. And so Bonnier came through to regain the lead and finally score BRM's first and long-awaited Grand Prix victory. It marked the end of an era. The sensational 60s loomed, and this was to be the last win at Zandvoort for a front-engined Formula 1 car.
Everything is permitted. We were all sleeping in the same hotels, no challenges for getting more money or not. The goal was to have a steering wheel and, if possible, a good car and win. Having the sun, the wind, and the vacation soul and atmosphere, It was for us like going in vacation in a way.
By the time cars and drivers returned to Holland in June 1960, rear-engine cars had not only drastically changed, but now utterly dominated Grand Prix racing. Reigning world champion Jack Brabham had a new, faster Cooper, and Stirling Moss was driving one of the stunningly low and light Lotus 18s. BRM2 had placed its engine in the back of its new cars, while the front-engined Aston Martins were already deemed obsolete, as were the brand new Scarabs of this man, American Lance Reventlow. Karel Godin de Beaufort was back at Zandvoort, having bought a Formula 2 Cooper, a proper single-seater compared to his Porsche, but no match for the ever-quicker 2.5-litre cars. In practice, all lap records were broken, as Moss in the Rob Walker Lotus, Brabham's Cooper and Innes Island in the Works Lotus all got into the 1-minute 33s, which was 3 seconds a lap faster than last year's pole time, as well as that of the fastest front-engine Ferrari. Brabham made the best start and took the lead, followed by Moss, who on lap 17 was lucky to escape injury when on the fast back stretch a concrete curb split under Brabham's Cooper and was flung into Stirling's right front wheel, smashing the hub and the tyre.
Jack went over this and flipped up in the air, and the thing's coming towards me. It landed on the tyre and forced me to have a pit stop, which was rather annoying. But if the rocket hit me, it would have killed me, certainly, yeah.
A spectator was less lucky. Standing in a forbidden area, he was killed by Dan Gurney's BRM when its brakes failed in the Tarzan corner. Moss, meanwhile, stormed through the field to make up the time lost in pits. And although he was lapping 2 seconds a lap faster than the Australian, there was no catching Brabham, who went on to win what was the last 2.5-litre Grand Prix at Zandvoort, as the FIA, in an attempt to reduce speeds, had decided that the engine capacity of F1 cars would be reduced to 1500cc from 1961, much to the disgust of the drivers.
Absolute waste of time. I mean, it really was. The cars were not exhilarating to drive, and here we've got these really good cars, and they suddenly say, look, we're not going to give you any power. I mean, they gut this apparatus. And, I mean, they really were such a backward step.
A backward step they were indeed, in terms of outright performance. During practice for the 1961 Dutch Grand Prix, the fastest cars barely got into the 135s. However, the 1.5-litre era was to provide spectacular racing and some epic cars. The new 1.5-litre Formula 1 gave us the striking Ferrari shark nose. And when in 1961 the Dutch Grand Prix started, down there, it was those famous Ferraris that got away first. The latest Ferrari finally had its engine in the back, and this engine was far superior to those of the British teams, which had spent more time protesting the new rules than preparing engines for them. At Zandvoort, Wolfgang von Trips took the lead in his Ferrari and was never headed. The German won what was a remarkable race, not just because it marked his and the shark-nosed Ferrari's first Grand Prix victory, but also because at Zandvoort, for the first and only time in history, all cars finished without making a single pit stop. Sadly, von Trips would never race at Zandvoort again. Fighting for the world title, he was killed in the Italian Grand Prix 4 months later. Although racing drivers were killed horrifically frequent, safety measures at circuits, Zandvoort included, were still primitive, poorly organized and terribly inadequate. Of all the drivers that had started the Dutch Grand Prix in the past 10 years, 14 had now been killed. And when the 1962 race got underway, Stirling Moss too was missing, having been terribly injured a month earlier in a career-ending crash at Goodwood. The risks, however, were commonly accepted and in fact very much considered to be part of the game. Zandvoort proved to be another milestone in 1962. As in practice, the all-new Lola had taken pole position before on race day Graham Hill, driving the BRM fitted with a new V8 engine, scored his first of what would be many Grand Prix wins. A year later, Hill, who had won the 1962 world title, was on the front row again, now driving a brand new BRM with the type of monocoque chassis that Team Lotus had introduced at Zandvoort a year earlier, when his revolutionary Type 25 had made its debut in Holland. In 1962, Lotus lead driver Jim Clark had retired, but now Jimmy was in a class of his own. In practice, he had lapped the circuit at an average speed of over 100 miles an hour, the first man to ever do so at Zandvoort, and in the race the Scot shot into the lead from pole position and spent the next 2 hours lapping the entire field on his way to a commanding win that confirmed his status as Formula One's newest, fastest driver. Behind the climax-powered Lotus, Dan Gurney in the Brabham and Ferrari's new driver John Surtees could do nothing but watch how Clark scored his first Dutch Grand Prix win, a win he would repeat a year later. The eventful, if unloved, 1.5-liter era came to an end in 1965. Honda's F1 car starred during its first outing at Zandvoort, but Lotus, now running Type 33s, still ruled. Although the fact that team owner Colin Chapman was arrested by Dutch police after a tussle on the starting grid would overshadow Jim Clark's third consecutive win in the Dutch dunes. It was Richie Ginter in the Honda, however, who took the lead at the start of what initially was an exciting race, as the American tried to stay ahead of Clark and Graham Hill, whose BRM had been blisteringly fast during pre-race testing. In the end, however, the scrap lasted just 6 laps, for again, nobody could match Clark's speed, and Jimmy pulled away, leaving Dan Gurney and Hill's teammate Jackie Stewart to fight over second place. And so Clark and Lotus won what was the last 1.5-liter F1 race held at Zandvoort. The following year, the cars would be powered by engines of up to 3000 cc. With the introduction of the 3-liter rules, speeds were expected to increase considerably, and Zandvoort was forced to prepare its now almost 20-year-old circuit for it. To widen the track's main straight, the pit building and the control tower were put back. Work for which there was not much time, but the circus director Hans Hugenholz wasn't too concerned.
Men is er nogal laat mee begonnen, heb ik begrepen. Komt het zaakje wel op tijd klaar?
Ja. We hebben nog een paar dagen om zaken af te werken nu. En ook in de volgende week kunnen nog kleine dingen worden uitgevoerd. Maar de grote trekken, zoals de zaak hier staat, is de zaak al gereed.
Although the 3-liter Formula One rules had been announced some years ago, many teams struggled to find suitable engines at first. Cooper had opted for an old and heavy Maserati V12, while Coventry Climax had withdrawn from racing but still produced a couple of 2-liter engines for reigning champions Team Lotus. BRM had built a complicated 3-liter H16 unit that Lotus would decide to also use, while Ferrari simply reduced the capacity of its 3.3-liter sports car engine. Bruce McLaren, seen here in practice, tried 2 V8s for his first ever F1 car. One Ford had used for the Indy 500 and the other had previously powered a Serenissima sports car. The McLaren was off the pace, yet it starred in a different role, as it was painted in the colors of the fictive Yamura team that was part of the script of a Hollywood movie called Grand Prix, which was filmed during several Formula One races throughout 1966, Zandvoort included. The movie was directed by John Frankenheimer, who had already filmed at Monaco and Spa before he and his crew came to Holland. Yves Montand was among the actors, playing the role of a French Ferrari driver.
Roll it!
In the real world, it was business as usual, as records were shattered. Mike Parks was the fastest of the Ferrari drivers, but could not break into the 128s like Dan Gurney did with his beautiful Eagle that was powered by a 2.7-litre version of the obsolete Climax engine. Clark too, in his 2-litre car, got into the 28s. But at the top of the timesheets, the new cars of Jack Brabham and his teammate Danny Hume reigned supreme. Jack Brabham had asked the Australian engineering company Repco to modify an aluminium Oldsmobile block for his 1966 cars. And this Repco V8 ultimately proved to be the best engine of the year. Brabham had just triumphed in France and Britain and duly took pole position at Zandvoort.
I think it's a very good circuit. It's a driver's circuit, and you also must have a very good handling motor car here. And this is something that I'm very interested in.
The Repco might have been the fastest engine, but Jim Clark arguably was the fastest driver. And as the two Brabhams took the lead, Jimmy, in his underpowered Lotus, held on for all he was worth. He moved up to second place when Hume parked his car in the pits with ignition trouble, and soon in heavy traffic the ever-impressive Scot was passing Brabham for the lead several times. Only a broken water pump outlet could slow the Lotus down. Clark was forced into the pits twice and dropped to third place, handing the win to Brabham. A year later, all but every F1 car now had a proper 3-litre engine, and lap times dropped a staggering 3 to 4 seconds. Apart from Ferrari, Honda was still the only car manufacturer involved in Grand Prix racing. But that all changed at Zandvoort with the arrival of the Lotus Type 49, which was powered by the all-new Cosworth DFV, a 3-litre V8 engine financed by Ford. There was near tragedy at the start, as a lone official still stood on the grid when the flag dropped. Luckily, all drivers managed to avoid him, and Graham Hill, who had put his Lotus Ford on pole position, took the lead until his new engine failed on lap 11. By then, his teammate Jimmy Clark, who had not driven the car before coming to Zandvoort, had already stormed to the front. Jimmy soon took the lead and gave a faultless demonstration of his talents and the promise of the new Ford Cosworth engine. It was fast, reliable, relatively affordable, and ultimately made available to other teams. This engine would power Formula One into an all-new world. A world dominated by television, sponsors, and consequently money. Formula One would never be the same.
It's true that the 60s, automobile racing was a pure sport. Even if we were called professionals, we were real amateurs. To be at a race course, it was not even a picnic. It was sandwiches. In the Ferrari traffic, it was spaghettis, prosciutto, parmigiano, a glass of eventually Lambrusco. The money was not a goal because there were no money into it except to buy a new engine, a new set of tires, no sponsors. Frankly, it was lovely. It was a lovely atmosphere. It was, we were like gypsies in a way, moving from one place to the other to another one all together. It looked like a perfect life.
Zandvoort had become very much part of that life. A fixed venue for the racing gypsies to travel to every spring or summer for what was now a traditional race on a much-loved circuit.
Zandvoort plays a very special role in my career. It was part of history in motor racing. It plays an important role in Formula One championship. I would say in Grand Prix racing, it was a vacation place. Don't forget that in that era, arguments about safety were not the main goal. The goal was the sport. The risk was accepted by everyone. The danger was there permanently. The dunes, the sand, the wind of the North Sea. Yes, it was the place to be. No consideration for the rest. Amusement, sport and happiness. In the original days, in the past, the way the track was designed, going up and down through the dunes, because we are in the middle of the dunes. The back section with all these very, very fast corners were not easy. If you speak about Tarzan or the fast corner before the straight, yes, you had to have a good car to be fast. It was very, very exciting, for sure.
When the Formula One circus returned to Zandvoort in June 1968, it was in a grim mood. In April, Jim Clark had been killed in a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim. Then in May, Mike Spence died at Indianapolis, and Ludovico Scarfiotti crashed to his death, practicing for a hill climb in Germany. Having lost 3 of their friends in 3 months, including Clark, the man they all considered to be the very best, many drivers felt nobody was safe anymore. At Zandvoort, heavy rain did little to raise their spirits. Jackie Stewart in Ken Tyrrell's Matra Ford dominated the day, making the most of his Dunlop wet weather tires. The Ferraris, fitted with an experimental rear wing, could not keep up on their Firestones. The conditions were grueling, as rain showers kept coming in from the North Sea. Stewart was never-headed and scored Matra's and Ken Tyrrell's first win on this miserable, gloomy day.
Danger in those days is a reality. 1 or 2 drivers, top drivers, were dying every year. Every Friday moving to the race course, we didn't know, or we had in mind, that it could be possible that on Monday you are not back at home. But that never stopped me, really. And it's never stopped anyone, in my opinion, because there is no room for fear in motor racing. Because if you start to think too much, for sure you are going to lose the half second you need to be a real contender.
At the end of the decade, the call for more safety had finally become a prominent, if still controversial, talking point. Although, on the eve of the 1969 Dutch Grand Prix, reigning world champion Graham Hill preferred to downplay the risks.
Well, there are certain risks, yes, but we do our best to cut them down and take as few risks as possible. But in a sport such as motor racing, a high-speed sport, there certainly is a certain amount of danger. And as there is in anything, that you start moving about it. The moment you get out of bed, of course, you risk injury.
Financial problems had done little for the poor state Zandvoort's facilities were in. Yet the track was still considered to be one of the safest by the 1967 world champion Danny Hulme.
Well, I'd say over the last 2 years of what you've done here with the circuit Zandvoort, with the Armco rail and the steel barriers around the circuit, and certainly this wire mesh netting you have all around here, this is a vast improvement. But it's true, there is no safe circuit anywhere in the world.
Jackie Stewart, though, was fiercely fighting for more safety, in spite of the objections of race organizers and even the press.
I think that motor racing should be made as safe as possible. It will never be completely safe, but at least we should use every modern method that's available to us.
Apart from safety issues, the talk at Zandvoort was very much about the four-wheel drive cars that Matra and Lotus had built to better cope with the power of the Ford Cosworth. Graham Hill tried this brand new Lotus 63 in practice, although his boss Colin Chapman admitted there were doubts about using Type 63 in the race.
It is the first time that I think that four-wheel drive cars run in training for a Grand Prix. We're still not quite sure whether we're actually going to race it in the race yet. It's very new and we have some development work to do with it. But we felt that it would be very interesting to bring it along here and to try it in competition with the existing cars and just to see how well it went.
In the end, both Team Lotus and Matra decided against entering their experimental cars in the race. And eventually, four-wheel drive would never prove to be a success in Formula One. The conventional two-wheel drive Lotuses of Hill and his new teammate Jochen Rindt took the lead at the start. Rindt had smashed the lap record in practice, getting into the 120s, as if to demonstrate how quickly Formula One was getting faster. The Austrian and Hill had a spectacular scrap for first place until the hard-charging Rindt started to pull away. Jochen did not get far though, for on lap 16 he retired with a broken drive shaft. This handed the lead to Stewart, who had passed Hill, whose works Lotus was soon attacked by Joe Sifford in Rob Walker's Lotus. As a great fight developed for third place between the McLaren of Hume, the Brabhams of Ickx and Jack Brabham, and the lone Ferrari of Chris Amon. There was no stopping Stewart though, and the Scot went on to win the Dutch Grand Prix for the second consecutive time. Apart from fighting for victories, however, the drivers for the first time in history now also fought for improving their chances to survive.
Everybody took in consideration the fact that you had to stop to have drivers being killed every year, talented champions, and the people want to change that. And slowly we moved to another world. I wouldn't say it was a dramatical change at the time, but things were changing slowly.
In this new world, old circuits like Spa in Belgium and the German Nürburgring were boycotted in 1970. And also the safety of Zandvoort, or rather the lack of it, was criticized. On the eve of the Dutch Grand Prix, the future of the race was very much in doubt. Having struggled to make money for years now, the circuit's management had done little to maintain, leave alone improve the track. And now even grass grew through its crumbling edges. As a result, what had long been considered one of Europe's safest circuits had a worn-out, run-down feel about it. Formula One cars were quickly becoming faster. As engine power increased, tires got bigger and better and commercial sponsors entered the sport, providing teams with money that speeded up development of groundbreaking aerodynamics. And so, in the summer of 1970, Formula One cars were lapping Zandvoort a stunning 10 seconds a lap faster than when the 3-liter engines had been first used just 4 years earlier. As if to underline the dangers of the circuit, in practice, BRM driver Pedro Rodriguez was lucky to walk away uninjured after his car went off at the flat-out section on the back of the circuit.
I was coming out of the corner and out, out just because you spun.
Surviving was not a matter of talent, it was just a matter of luck. I think the sport is made for young people, generally speaking. I think when you are young, 16, 17, 18, 20, whatever, you have no fear. You are brave, you see the top of the mountain, and you want to climb it.
Jackie Ickx qualified his Ferrari on the front row, lining up alongside the march of Jackie Stewart and Jochen Rindt's Lotus Type 72 with its extreme aerodynamics. In the race, Rindt soon took the lead and he went on to score his revolutionary car's first Grand Prix victory. It would be a sad, hollow win though, for on lap 23, Piers Courage was killed when his De Tomaso crashed at Tunnel Oost. Profoundly affected by this tragedy, Jochen, a close friend of Piers, thought about quitting the sport before deciding to race on. On his way to the world title, Rindt too was killed, less than 3 months later during practice for the Italian Grand Prix. Following the deaths of Bruce McLaren and Courage, Jochen was the third Formula One driver that was killed that year. And the calls for more safety became ever louder.
I think the man who changed the most motor racing in the early days was, without any doubt, Jackie Stewart and Jochen Rindt. Unfortunately, Jochen Rindt didn't live long enough. But Jackie Stewart, in my opinion, is the man who did the most for safety. It was not an utopia by mainly Jackie Stewart or Jochen Rindt to build up the GPDA, Grand Prix Drivers Association, to be listened by the authorities and the track owners to improve safety. They did a huge job, and we have to be very thankful for what they did and to be the first one to do it.
Although the tragedy that claimed the life of Piers Courage had underlined the dangers of racing at Zandvoort, Formula One returned to Holland in 1971. And, as if the circuit wasn't risky enough already, on race day it rained.
The philosophy at the time was, you start, whatever, it's a storm, whatever the wind blows at 100 kilometers, and you finish it. I dislike rain. Everybody thought that I love racing in the wet, and I maintain that idea for years, that I love motor racing in the wet, so it could kill already my opponents, you know, saying that, well, he's there, okay, it's for him. I dislike it, and everybody dislike. But probably I had a slight advantage on the fact that I did a lot of motorcycle before, having only 2 wheels. Probably you have a different sensibility on the throttle and on the brakes and all these things. So I had probably a small advantage.
On the slippery circuit, helped by superior Firestone tyres, X and Rodriguez led the entire field during their phenomenal duel. As many others ended the day in the soaked sand of the dunes, Jackie won, beating Pedro, who would be sadly killed 3 weeks later in a sports car race in Germany. In 8th place was Dutchman Gijs van Lennep, who made his Formula One debut that day.
I won Le Mans 24 hours, 1971, and a week later I was allowed to drive my first Formula One race because the SAN, the Stichting Autosport Nederland, he got the money together to get the second 30s for Zandvoort. So that was great. I was a little ill, so I was not so very fit after Le Mans, because it's quite heavy, of course. I did quite well, but I thought, oh dear, 70 laps is quite a long time in a Formula One, because it's very precise, but it's hard work. It's push. So I actually prayed for rain, and my prayer was answered because it was raining the next day. I had also the right tires, so that was very lucky, the Firestone tires, and the others were the half of the Goodyear tires, and that was Danny Hulme, Jackie Stewart and Graham Hill. They were on the Goodyears, and I was on the Firestones, so I was 8s, and they were 9s, 10s and 11s. But they all were champions, ex-world champions, so that was... So even in Bowers in the hotel at the dinner at night, I was just an upcoming little guy, you know, and Graham Hill was the big character. And he said, who the hell is that chap? Because I was passing him over the Hunsrug in the fast corner, now called the Slotenmaker corner. I passed him. So he said, Jesus Christ, how's that possible? Who's that Van Lennep?
The following year, Zandvoort was finally deemed too dangerous and taken off the World Championship calendar. Jackie Stewart came to Holland to explain what needed to be changed if the circuit was to host a Grand Prix again. Stewart demanded a wider, resurfaced circuit, larger runoff areas and new guardrails to be installed all around the track. Also, a new slow corner was required to reduce speeds on the backstretch.
Zandvoort was always reasonable safe, but actually not, because when it was built, you had the road and you had grass on the side, and then first you had nothing, and then afterwards we had the rail and everything. But it was too narrow out of the corners. And because the track was so fast, on the second bit was very fast after the schijfvlak. Well, the schijfvlak itself also. But then after that, left, right, and then right again. And then right again into the woods, as we call it that time. Yeah, that was nearly flat out all the way. And if there something goes wrong, you have a flat tire or suspension breaks, you have a big problem. You're hanging in the highest tree, in the dennenbomen. So that is not so good. And I understand that they had to reduce the speed there so they make a new chicane going into the woods.
Miraculously, the circuit's new management scraped together the 2.5 million guilders needed for this reconstruction work. When Stewart came to inspect the many modifications, however, he promptly demanded more. These were hastily completed, and in July 1973, Formula One returned to the all-new and improved Zandvoort. Van Lennep too was back.
Frank Williams was sponsored by Marlboro, and I was sponsored by Marlboro in Holland. Marlboro wanted me to drive. So they said to Frank Williams, you have to let Gijs drive in Zandvoort. I went to the factory of Frank Williams to make a seat, and he brought it to Zandvoort, and I get in the car and go practice. And it went quite well, actually.
Zandvoort welcoming back Formula One on its revised circuit was a dream come true for Dutch motor racing. But sadly, it would turn into a horrific nightmare. That the track was still fast and far from safe was ominously proven in practice, when reigning world champion Emerson Fittipaldi had a huge shunt and injured his feet. His Lotus teammate Ronnie Patterson claimed pole position, and on Sunday Ronnie took the lead as the field blasted towards the Tarzan corner. For the first time, the race was broadcasted live by Dutch television. Directing his very first Grand Prix was Martijn Lindenberg.
1973 was a race you never will forget. It was my first race. The start was normal. It was fast but normal, clean, nothing happened. Then after a couple of laps the riders came in formation as normal. But then in lap 8 on the backside of the circuit where I was directing, there was a car rolling in my shot. This is where Tunnel Oost once used to be. A flat out right kink in the track. And right down there is where Roger Williamson's car came to a rest after his tire failed and it all went horribly wrong.
It was quite a good race. Was fit. But we had the accident of Roger Williamson in the race.
It was an accident that came out of the blue. Directly you could see it was a danger. It was enormous danger. The guy was running around the car, tried to do something that was helpless, impossible to do. Then you realize that you don't have much time for yourself to take a decision. You broadcast it, you cut around, you stay on the shot, you ask them to zoom in, to zoom out. And I thought the best is show what it is. It was live on television, you realize that, but the impact comes later. And showing it the way as it was, a fixed shot, everybody running out, that make it more dramatic maybe as to do something else. I keep the shot framed. You see people walking in and out. And the helplessness of those guys was enormous. And maybe that was the dramatic part of the whole accident.
And everybody said, why didn't you stop? I said, we didn't know he was not out of the car. Because we are only passing every 1 minute 30, 1.5 minutes, and you go black smoke, dark smoke, white smoke, terrible smoke. You hardly could see a thing. So we drove very slowly with the double yellow flag. And then I see a little man creeping under the car in the smoke. So I said, oh, maybe he's out.
I was criticized the day after. First time live on television, somebody died in a car, in a fire.
The 1973 race, I finished. I was very happy, but I knew there was the accident. I also knew that I thought he was out of the car. So if I come into the pits, I'm still quite happy because I know I knew I was sixth.
Gedaan, hè? Ging goed, hè?
Joe, dat ging erin.
Ding dat liep, dat ding. Oh, dat?
Wie was dat?
Williams.
Maar hij was er wel uit, zag ik.
Nee, hij is dood. Hij was al dood voordat ze hem...
Meen je dat nou?
Ja.
Ik zag hem iemand eruit
dat was Pearly.
Die heeft nog geprobeerd om te helpen.
Die heeft hem nog geprobeerd eruit te halen.
Jezus Christus.
Ja.
The race was won by Jackie Stewart, but the only hero that tragic day was David Purley, the man Gijs van Lennep and the other drivers had seen in the smoke. David had stopped and tried to save Roger Williamson. His lone and heroic fight was a heartbreaking demonstration of Zandvoort's scandalously poor safety measures and its shambolic organization. The next day, Purley returned to the scene of the tragedy.
Got to be looked into this because, you know, there's just something wrong. I think possibly the race should have been stopped so that the fire engine could come around at full speed. He seemed to be hugging the curb, obviously, because the cars were still coming through at racing speeds, virtually. I think the race should have been stopped, and it's very difficult, of course, because we're still about 1.5 miles away from the grid where the decisions are made, and all they could see was a lot of smoke going up in the air. They didn't obviously realise the extent of the tragedy.
What are your feelings about this today?
Well, if you'd asked me yesterday, I think it would have been a different... I would have said something different, but I've slept on it, and I can see now why a lot of people wouldn't come and help me. But I think that we could have, you know, done something else. We could have done something more for Roger.
Roger Williamson's death was a turning point in the history of Formula One, because now, for the first time, the need for more safety had been shown on millions of television screens around the world in the cruelest of ways.
These dramatical accidents are live now. You could see them at the moment. They were absolutely tragic. And that has encouraged everyone to progress.
It's always sad that we need to have a very bad accident to get the change on. But the change was necessary. And if you see footage of 73 or the years before, then you see there is no protection. Everybody's running in and out, and then everybody could stand everywhere. That changed enormously. Ironically, after an accident like that, after an enormous accident like that, sure.
Of course, that sort of accident from Roger Williamson changed the whole lot.
Throughout the 70s, slowly but surely, the cars and the circuits, the whole organization of Formula One became safer. As Grand Prix racing evolved into a global television show, more and more sponsors entered the sport, and the dangers that had once simply been considered part of the game were no longer accepted. For there was much more at stake now than just human lives. Formula One was becoming big business. The Dutch Grand Prix remained part of the World Championship, and Zandvoort provided some of the decade's most spectacular races. However, the circuit soon struggled to meet the demands of the man that was slowly but surely taking control of Formula One, improving the show all the time and selling it to race organizers for ever higher rates.
The Formula One changed completely with the first appearance of Bernie Ecclestone when he introduced the professionalism and the business into motor racing. Then the world changed completely to a world who has nothing to do anymore with the decade we have mentioned, the 60s, 70s, and in my opinion, for the best.
By 1976, Bernie Ecclestone, the owner of the Brabham team, had unified most of the other team bosses, and on behalf of them was negotiating much more lucrative deals with race organizers and beginning to vastly improve the quality and income of television broadcasts.
Bernie was a genius guy. He steps in Formula One as a business guy. He saw business in Formula One. Not always very friendly, but on the other hand there was a vision, and I like the vision. The work he was doing, his ideas to make the sport bigger. And if you see the difference from then Formula One to now, the difference is enormously. And everything is organized, maybe too much. and you cannot touch the sports anymore. But on the other hand, there was a philosophy to do it, and let's try to do it, and yeah, the success was there.
Under Ecclestone, Formula One grew explosively. For the 1977 Dutch Grand Prix, no less than 34 cars were entered, varying from the Ferrari of two-time champion Niki Lauda to the revolutionary turbocharged Renault and privateers such as the Ram March and Brian Henton's Boro. For the circus to come to town, Zandvoort now paid more money every year, as Ecclestone and the circuit's director Johan Berenpoot explained.
We have already in contracts going on for another 2 or 3 years with normal escalation clauses in them. So, I mean, the cinemas go up, the football tickets go up, and people pay a little more for everything, for the general costs, and that's all it'll cost.
Ons budget voor deze wedstrijd is voor het eerst gestegen boven het 1 miljoen, dus 1,1 miljoen gulden.
As the 70s came to an end, Formula One started to expand at an even greater pace. Bigger and better TV exposure made teams and drivers household names around the world, and the professionalism of sponsorship meant the sport turned over more money than ever before. While many of these sponsors, especially tobacco companies and liquor brands, added a touch of glitter and glamour to the ever greater show. The development of innovative wing cars made Formula One faster too, while the introduction of turbocharged engines by Renault promised a dramatic increase in speeds and would quickly draw the attention of other car manufacturers such as BMW and Honda. In what now was rapidly becoming the world's largest annual sporting spectacle, Zandvoort was aging fast. Its old, cramped facilities represented everything that Bernie Ecclestone was eager to leave behind. And although the circuit's unique layout continued to ensure exciting races, the crowds that came to see it were too small for the Dutch Grand Prix to make enough money for Zandvoort to ready itself for the 80s.
You know, with the turbocharge on this track, it was not easy, but it was really interesting. The Formula One have a lot of success. Television, newspaper, a lot of transmission in each part of the world.
Money was not only needed to consistently upgrade the track's safety, which in 1980 included building this new corner to slow the cars down on the back of the circuit, but also to meet the ever higher demands of broadcasting a Grand Prix live around the world. Global television was the foundation of Ecclestone's master plan and would ultimately become Formula One's major income source. Consequently, Zandvoort faced an ever-growing challenge.
Het totale budget van deze Grand Prix die we nu zondag gaan rijden is 1,6 miljoen. En er moet natuurlijk aardig wat publiek komen voordat we dat allemaal binnen hebben. Maar we hebben er eigenlijk wat vertrouwen in dat het kan.
Unfortunately, it wasn't. Zandvoort never attracted the 80,000 spectators it needed to come and see its Grand Prix and finance what became a more expensive show every year. It was becoming a more exciting show too, because Formula One's latest revolution had made the cars go faster than ever. The crazily powerful turbocharged engines now ruled the world.
It was really, really very exciting. We have no limit in the power at this time, because in the practice we have a special tires, special qualified tires, and we make 1 lap with the qualified tires, not 2 laps. After 1 lap, the tire was destroyed. It was amazing. It was incredible. I remember inside me now, when you put the power, you start like not the aircraft more. When you start, you have 1 lap to go really very, very fast. If you lose these laps, you stop it and you change the tires. And I was very exciting when I was sitting in my car to start to do that. But you know, At this time, we have the wing like a 747, because if you don't have a wing, very big wing, you don't stay on the road.
Zandvoort too had trouble staying on the road. In fact, it was spinning out of control financially. Outdated, out of money and out of time, the circuit even put its faith in the hands of this man, Michael Hordo, an unknown Canadian businessman who had bought Zandvoort's Bowers Hotel at the beginning of 1981, and whose adventurous plans for the small town not only included saving the circuit, but also building a golf course and even bidding for the Olympics. Hordo and the circus management, though, never clicked.
We have a situation here where the senior management of this organization, which is a multi-million guilder organization, are totally incompetent.
Hij verlangt mensen om zich heen die bij vingerknippen onmiddellijk beginnen te hollen. Ja, zo'n type ben ik nou helemaal niet.
In the end, Hordo and his wild plans vanished, and the circuit was left at the mercy of Bernie Ecclestone and the local council, which now threatened to close the track and build houses on it. The 1981 Dutch Grand Prix, therefore, looked to have been the very last, until a last-minute deal with Ecclestone secured its short-term future. For as long as he was fighting with the FIA over total control of the sport, Bernie could well do with another race he more or less owned.
We hebben een prima samenwerking erin, die voor beide partijen vruchten zal afwerpen. Dat die vruchten wat groter zullen zijn uiteindelijk voor FOCA dan voor het circuit. Dat is niet onmogelijk, maar daar heb ik ook helemaal geen problemen mee.
And so the Dutch Grand Prix was held after all in 1982. Fast but fragile, the turbocharged wing cars proved to be amongst the most dangerous Formula One machinery in history. At Zandvoort, tragedy nearly struck again.
When I brake at 340 kilometers, I lose my suspension on the front left, I lose the brake, I lose the tires, I lose a steering wheel, I lose everything. And I don't control nothing. This is a very, very bad moment. And you have only one thing to wait, is to finish well. And I finish very well in Zandvoort, in the middle of the tires. Your tires is coming back on my head, every part. My car was in two pieces. And it was impossible for me to get out of the car because as I have le volant, the wheel here, I have the gearbox here, but it's a miracle. And it was impossible, I was like that completely, but my legs was like that, exactly. When the car was stopped completely, first thing I do, with my feet, I do this. And I said, oh putain, everything is moving. And here I was really, really happy because the crash is very, very strong.
A year later, René was back at Zandvoort, now driving for Ferrari, and he scored what would be his last Grand Prix win.
Yeah, it was a fantastic race. I am not qualified in a good condition, 8 or 10, I don't remember exactly, but the Ferrari was very strong, very competitive. During the start, I lose my clutch. I have a big problem with my clutch, but the gearbox of Ferrari was very easy. And I do 3/4 of the race with no clutch. And when I was behind Prost, I think, Piquet and Prost has a crash in Tarzan, and I have a leader of the race, and I win the race.
Meanwhile, Ecclestone too had won. Having defeated the FIA, he now owned Formula One's commercial rights and set out to further improve the quality and revenues of TV broadcasts and taking Grand Prix racing to where the money was.
Bernie Ecclestone was moving forward fast, and Zandvoort, unable to keep up, soon failed to fit into the fantastic vision Bernie had for the sport's future. Consequently, by the mid-80s, Formula One was all but done with this once-hailed circuit.
You have a lot of engine constructors who arrived in Formula One because Renault push very hard, and Honda is arriving with a turbocharged, Ferrari is built a turbocharged, Porsche is arriving with a turbocharged, BMW is arriving with a turbocharged, because the Formula One at this time had a very high success. Everybody, a lot of different countries want to have this Grand Prix. A lot of countries have a lot of money to spend it. If we have a spectator, it's no problem. If we don't have, it's no problem. It's like that. And the problem is the level to adjust, the request of Bernie to adjust your track. It was at very, very high level, and to put a lot of money. It was too expensive.
And so the story of the Dutch Grand Prix ended in the summer of 1985, when a full field of Formula One cars dived into the Tarzan corner for the final time. Zandvoort had simply and finally become too small a stage for the ever-expanding and ever-bigger Formula One spectacle. In this brave new world where the sport was heading, there was simply no place for this cramped and crumbling temple of speed. Things would never be the same. After that last Dutch Grand Prix, Formula One moved on. And Zandvoort, the original Zandvoort, became a memory that we still cherish to this very day.
The motor racing always was a sport, and of course, because of television, really, it became professional. And once you do that, you lose quite a lot of the heart. I'm glad that I raced when I did, when it was dangerous and exciting.
The original Zandvoort was a great track because it was very fast. We loved the circuit because it went up and down. It was also quite a technical circuit. And it was quick, so it's not for everybody.
It was nice to go to Zandvoort, to Amsterdam, near the sea, and the track is really interesting. It's always a big pleasure to go in Zandvoort.
Zandvoort was a temple, but it was a very special temple because the atmosphere, the soul of Zandvoort was unique.